At 9:13 p.m., with 17 hours and 2 minutes left before the Calder Ridge 400, the Silver No. 28 car sat under Bay 4's white pit lights with its rear bodywork removed, and the sponsor glass above it still reflected champagne stems and polished shoes. Adrian Holt, the newly elevated operations director, whose name looked clean in trade magazines and investor packets, had already dismissed the woman in the scuffed black work jacket 10 hours earlier, with a glance that moved from the grease at her cuticles to the girl at her knee, holding a white stuffed rabbit by one ear. Lena Carter, 34, compact, quiet, and still carrying the cold of the paddock morning in her sleeves, did not argue. She did not flinch. She simply took the temporary pass off her jacket, set it on the stainless table, lifted Junie into one arm, and walked out while somebody near the telemetry wall said, for the benefit of the room, maybe the rabbit can read the misfire trace. 7 hours after that, while men with executive badges stood in silence, and the overnight coffee went stale in paper cups, the engine would fire on the second sight crank, settle within 11 seconds, and hold a cleaner idle than it had shown in 11 days. The woman they turned away that morning would become the only person in the building who could stop the car from hurting someone again. Before we dive further, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please share it with your beloved ones and subscribe to this channel. That same morning had begun cold and bright, the sponsor flags already cracking in the wind above the haulers. The Asterion Apex compound occupied 63,480 square feet along the back straight, with a machine shop, a composites room, 2 data suites, a hospitality mezzanine, and a glass conference box that looked down on the garages, as if motorsport were something that improved when seen from above. The race was the Calder Ridge 400, 184 laps, green flag at 2:15 p.m., on Saturday, live broadcast to 7 countries. Title sponsor clauses tied to a podium the team could not afford to miss. For 11 days, the car had been losing torque without warning on corner exit, sometimes at 6,800 Remimet, sometimes at 7,140, sometimes not at all. 3 senior engineers had taken turns with it and made it worse. The car still cut power as if a hand had closed around its throat. Lena arrived at 7:28 a.m. in a faded blue pickup with a cracked center vent and a thermos between the seats. Junie slept for another minute after the engine stopped, her cheek against the rabbit called Clover, one shoe unlaced. A curl of hair stuck to her face by the warmth of the truck. Lena waited before moving. She counted something no one could see. Then she reached across, retied the child's lace without waking her, and checked the paper wristband folded in the cup holder, the one Jules Navarro had left for her at gate security at 6:51. Jules was a junior data systems engineer, 26, sharp enough to know when a problem was moving in circles and not high enough to be heard. He had seen Letta solve a short-track ignition dropout in Elkhorn County and had not forgotten. When Junie woke, she asked for orange juice. Later, Lena said. Junie nodded, because she had learned the shape of later, and because children who spent mornings in trucks and evenings around rolling toolboxes understood schedules in units of after this. And when it stops raining and once the loud thing is done, she climbed down holding Clover and walked beside her mother through the paddock with the solemnity of a child entering an adult space. Mara Quinn was standing in Bay 4 when they arrived, headset around her neck, tablet under one arm, checking freight signatures against parts inventory. She handled the movements of a race weekend with the calm, exact authority of someone who knew where every crate, axle, radio battery, and person was supposed to be. If Adrian Holt made decisions upward, Mara made them sideways, into the mess where events actually happened. She looked up as Lena paused 2 meters from the car and took in the whole scene with one sweep that seemed almost careless until it became obvious that nothing in the bay had escaped it. The rear deck was on a stand. The thermal blankets lay folded too neatly to have been pulled in urgency. A silver witness mark on the crank sensor bracket sat misaligned by the width of a fingernail. The loom branch running behind the bell housing had been rewrapped with fresh high-temp tape, but not on the original radius, which left a slight flat where there should have been a curve. Lena crouched beside the gearbox without announcing herself, touched the loom once, then lifted her fingers and rubbed the residue between thumb and forefinger. "Not oil," she said. No one answered. She was not speaking to anyone in particular. Mara watched her stand and step closer to the open rear quarter where the exhaust runners still held yesterday's scent. Lena bent her head, not dramatically, only enough to catch something in the air. Then she looked toward the floor patch just ahead of the right rear pickup point. "That pan has moved," she said. 3 millimeters, Jules murmured before he could stop himself. Lena looked at him for the first time, closer to 4.2. Mara felt something quick and involuntary pass through her chest, too brief to name and gone too fast to keep. She dismissed it as recognition of competence and went back to her tablet, though her attention did not leave the woman by the car. Hunter Voss entered Bay 4 at 7:41, carrying a laptop and the brisk impatience of a man whose authority depended on never appearing uncertain in front of subordinates. He was the performance director, clean-shaven, pressed, expensive watch half hidden under his cuff, and he spoke in conclusions. He had built his career on being faster in meetings than other people were in thought. Adrian trusted him because he made complexity sound finished. "She the freelancer?" Hunter asked, not lowering his voice. Jules said, "I asked her to take a look at the dropout logs." Hunter gave him a stare flat enough to stop weaker men from speaking for the rest of the morning. "You asked outside process." Lena was still looking at the car. Junie had found a line in the concrete and was walking it carefully with Clover's ear trailing beside her shoe. Hunter looked from the child to the truck keys in Lena's hand, to the scuffed knees of her work pants. "We are not running open auditions in a race bay," Mara said. "If she sees something, hearing it costs us 30 seconds. Hunter ignored the sentence completely, which was one of his most practiced skills. He set his laptop on the table, called up a trace, and began telling the room what the car was doing, as though he were describing weather that had happened to another continent. Sensor disagreement, torque intervention, possible ECU interpretation fault. They would replace the crank position sensor again, repin the shield drain, and rerun the warm-up cycle. His tone contained the performance of decisiveness that often passes for it. Lena stepped to the back of the car and pointed once, not touching. "That branch is too tight at heat." Hunter did not look. "It isn't. She's right." Jules before fear could catch up to his mouth. "The reroute's off the drawing radius." Hunter turned to him with a smile that did not alter the temperature of his face. "The drawing radius is for ideal assembly, not track repair." Lena said nothing. She simply reached into the side pocket of her jacket, took out a short inspection mirror with one chipped edge, and angled it under the loom behind the bell housing where the light was poor. She held the mirror still for 2 seconds, then handed it to Jules. He looked, his throat moved. "There's witness rub under the braid." Hunter took the mirror, glanced, and put it back on the cart. "Cosmetic." At 8:02, Adrian Holt came down from the mezzanine conference room with 2 sponsors, a legal advisor, and the habit of making a decision before any question could complicate it. He was 42, beautifully tailored, and recently moved from corporate strategy into race operations. He saw the unfamiliar mechanic, the child, the pause in workflow, and decided what the scene meant before he was close enough to hear it. "What's this?" he asked. Hunter answered, "An unscheduled outside opinion." Adrian's gaze moved once over Lena and stopped at Junie, who was standing beside a cabinet with Clover clutched to her chest. Whatever he thought in that moment remained inside him, but it hardened his face into the kind of civility that leaves no room. He did not ask Lena her name. He did not ask what she had seen. He did not ask why Jules had called her. "We're under restricted prep," he said. "Only assigned personnel in this bay." Mara said. She identified rub on the hot side branch. Adrian kept his eyes on Lena. 3 senior engineers already checked it. You can go." The sentence landed with the quiet administrative finality of a stamp hitting paper. It was not loud, that made it worse. Lena did not argue. She did not defend the hour she had driven or the call she had answered before daylight, or the mirror still lying on the cart with the truth in it. She took off the temporary pass, set it neatly beside the laptop, crouched to zip Junie's jacket against the wind coming in from pit lane, lifted the child into one arm, picked up her tool roll with the other, and turned away. Somebody near the coffee machine, one of the simulator engineers, trying to make the room laugh as nervous men do when power has just been exercised, said, "Maybe the rabbit can read the misfire trace." Nobody rebuked him. That was part of it too. Mara looked at Lena then, expecting perhaps a hard mouth, a flung sentence, some visible mark of offense. What she saw instead was more difficult to sort. Lena adjusted Junie's weight on her hip, tucked the child's fallen rabbit ear back over her shoulder so it would not drag on the floor, and left Bay 4 as though the room no longer had operational relevance. Authority exercised without the willingness to listen is not strength. It is a specific and very costly kind of blindness. By 8:37 the car was back on stands. Hunter had the branch unwrapped, the crank sensor replaced for the second time in 4 days, and a fresh strip of high-temp tape on the section Lena had identified. Adrian had moved on to sponsor breakfast. Mara was signing fuel delivery forms when she saw Jules looking toward the open garage door long after Lena had disappeared through it. "You saw it too," Mara said. Jules nodded once. "The rub isn't cosmetic." "Then say it again." He gave a small, helpless movement of one shoulder toward the bay, toward Hunter, toward the organizational chart that mattered more than observation. Witness was not power. Sometimes it was only pain with a headset on. Outside the compound, Lena walked Junie back across the paddock, past tire stacks, catering vans, generator cables, and a row of drivers in branded jackets, who all looked as if they had been raised indoors. The morning wind had teeth in it. Junie's nose had gone pink. "Orange juice now?" she asked. In the truck, Junie accepted this and climbed into the passenger seat. Lena poured juice from a bottle into a paper cup with 3 ice cubes from the motel machine wrapped in a napkin. Junie drank half and fell asleep again before they reached the service road. Lena drove 12 miles east to Carter Fleet and Fabrication, a cinderblock shop with 4 bays, 1 alignment rack, a parts room the size of a walk-in closet, and a hand-painted sign. There were manuals on the shelf above her desk, not novels, 2 mugs by the sink, 1 small pink sock pinned to a magnet board because Junie had once declared it lucky. Lena parked behind a municipal refuse truck, waiting on a brake chamber, and let the engine idle 6 seconds longer than necessary before shutting it off. She carried Junie inside without waking her and set her on the office couch under a folded welding blanket. Clover remained tucked under the child's chin. Lena pulled the dented oscillating fan 2 feet closer, aimed it away from the couch so the noise would mask the air compressor cycling on and off, then stood for a moment with one hand on the office doorframe and the other still closed around her truck keys. She did not curse Adrian Holt. She did not replay the joke. She simply stood there until the stillness became decision, then opened Bay 2 and rolled a bread truck over the pit. The bread truck belonged to a regional distributor with no patience for downtime. The work order said intermittent ABS light, steering vibration under loaded right turns, and a faint hot smell. Lena road tested it, returned, and jacked the front right. The runout showed 0, 7 millimeters, not enough to create the vibration. She lay on the creeper, eyes tracing the harness above the frame rail, where years of fleet maintenance had taught other hands to reroute by convenience. At the first bracket, everything looked clean. At the second, a zip tie had been pulled 1 tooth too tight, flattening the insulation against a rough weld seam. Under load, the wire arsed just enough to spike the wheel speed reading and wake the ABS. Lena cut the tie, slid back, went to the shelf for split loom, a rubber-lined P-clamp, and a length of abrasion sleeve, then rebuilt the section so it would survive another 40,000 miles, and a driver who never once needed to know her name. At 11:06, Jules sent her a text with 3 screenshots from the number 28 trace and 1 line beneath them. "You were right about heat." Lena looked at the images while standing at the bench vise. Torque cut at 113 degrees Celsius on the right bank harness channel. Crank sync flutter on corner exit. Shield drain voltage moving when it should have been still. She wiped her thumb once across the screen, enlarged the waveform, and studied it long enough for her coffee to go cold beside the vise. Then she set the phone face down and went back to work. At Asterion Apex, track B was becoming visible only to the people low enough to be splashed by it. Hunter ordered a software patch, loaded at 11:24. Adrian approved the call remotely between sponsor obligations and a recorded interview about operational resilience. The patch widened the tolerance window for the sensor disagreement. It was not a fix. It was a way of hiding the symptom until it moved somewhere more dangerous. Jules said that quietly, once to Hunter near the data wall. Hunter said, "I need solutions, not caution." Mara heard it while signing off on tire allocation and made a note on her tablet that had nothing to do with tires. At 12:18, the engine ran through a static warm-up without cutting torque. The telemetry wall stayed green. Two mechanics laughed in relief. Hunter closed his laptop with a satisfaction more visible than the evidence warranted. Adrian came down from the mezzanine, saw the green bars, and said, "Good. Keep this contained." He did not ask what had changed, only whether the schedule would hold. For 47 minutes, the problem looked solved. The false comfort lasted until 1:05 p.m., when reserve driver Thomas Bell, 196 pounds of compact aggression and reflex, honed by 15 years of braking later than other men considered sane, took the no. 28 onto the service loop for a controlled heat-soak shakedown. The first lap was clean. The second showed mild sink noise. On the third, exiting turn 9 at 142 miles an hour, the torque cut returned with an overeager regen bite from the rear axle. The car stepped left, snapped right, and hit the barrier with the rear corner, enough to tear the diffuser mounts, free and fracture Tomas's left ulna against the steering rim. He climbed out on his own, pale under the helmet line, and swore exactly twice before the medics reached him. A rear brake duct smoldered for 16 seconds. One tire tech burned his palm, knocking away a panel beginning to char. No one in Bay 4 said the patch had hidden the warning until it could arrive at speed. No one needed to. The evidence lay in the driver's arm, held carefully against his chest, while the medics walked him away. Indifference does not bend to evidence the way malice sometimes does. Adrian reached the bay 4 minutes later, with his jaw set harder than before. Hunter was already telling him about the barrier angle, the unexpected regen event, the possibility of impact-induced data corruption. Jules stood at the back of the group with his face gone still. Mara noticed that Adrian's hand had found the door frame at some point without his slow. Noticing, it remained there while Hunter spoke. "Do you believe that?" Mara asked after Adrian and Hunter had gone to the upstairs office. Jules answered with a sound too small to call a laugh. "No. Then show me everything from the last repair." Mara knew where the archive rules bent. At 2:11, she and Jules were in the mezzanine records room, opening a metal cabinet that should have been cleared before the season began and had not been. The cabinet held prior homologation amendments, old setup sheets, harness routing drawings, brake cooling revisions, and 3 gray binders with dates running back 4 years. In the second binder, between a rear suspension compliance note and an invoice packet for obsolete thermal wrap, Mara found a 12-page deviation dossier stamped Field Corrective Action 17B. The author line read L. Carter. Jules looked at it once and went very quiet. The pages were dense with annotated photographs, routing sketches, temperature notes, and one sentence underlined twice. Right side hot branch must retain free radius under bell housing movement. If flattened during floor repair, shield drain can microfracture and produce intermittent crank sink loss under heat load. The date was 3 years old, from Lena's term at Halcyon Dynamics, the supplier that had built the original emergency harness revision. Tucked behind the dossier were 5 setup sheets, all initialed LC, and a signed routing drawing showing exactly the branch Lena had pointed to within 12 seconds of entering the bay that morning. There was more. An email printout clipped to the back showed Hunter Voss, then a senior performance consultant, requesting a cheaper field routing after a crash repair to save turnaround time on a flyaway weekend. Another message from Lena Carter warned that the altered clamp point would reduce free movement by 3 millimeters, and eventually load the shield drain under thermal expansion. The last page was a closure note signed by someone above her and marked accepted for event use only. Mara read the packet twice. On the second reading she took in the handwriting, block printed, exact, with no wasted mark. She thought of the woman in the morning light, touching the loom once and knowing. At 2:34, Adrian read the dossier in his office while Tomas Bell's x-rays moved through the medical trailer and the owner called twice from an airport lounge. Hunter stood 3 feet from the desk and kept offering explanations shaped like contingencies instead of ownership. Adrian turned pages more slowly as he went. The room had 2 windows. By the 4th page, he was no longer looking out either of them. Was she here this morning, he asked. Hunter hesitated exactly long enough to be noticed. A contractor showed up, yes. Adrian looked up. The author of this was in my bay this morning. Hunter said nothing. Silence is a line. It said enough. The summons did not come from Adrian. It came from Mara at 2:49, through the number Jules had used. She kept it bare. Need you back at Bay 4, car cold, dossier found. Tomas injured. 18 hours to green. Lena read the message at 2:53 while kneeling beside a skid steer loader with a hydraulic leak, so slow it only appeared after heat and vibration, which meant most shops would replace seals until they got lucky. She traced the damp line back to a hairline crack in a banjo fitting, marked it with yellow paint, and only then stood. Junie was at the office desk drawing a car with unusually large wheels and a rabbit in the passenger seat. Lena typed, sends all traces from impact lap and last 3 warm-ups. Mara sent them in 41 seconds. Lena studied the files on her phone, one elbow against the parts shelf. After a minute, she typed again, keep the car cold. Don't move the branch behind the bell housing. I'll come after dark, that was all. The afternoon lengthened in 2 places at once. At the raceway, Bay 4 carried the embarrassed quiet of a room that had discovered it had been wrong in a way paper could prove. Hunter disappeared into meetings. Adrian spent the next hour answering ownership, medical, and series officials. Tomas's fracture meant the primary driver would have to shoulder a longer stint plan if the car ran at all. At 6 p.m., the team needed to submit driver allocation. At 8:30, the car needed to pass post-repair scrutiny or start from pit lane under penalty. The race did not care about hierarchy. It cared about whether the machine would break again at speed. At the shop, Lena finished every job already promised before she shut a door. She replaced the cracked fitting on the skid steer, torqued the bread truck caliper bracket, called 2 fleet clients with completion times precise to the quarter hour, and only then went to the office. Junie had fallen asleep over the drawing. Clover lay under one small hand. Lena folded the paper once, placed it in the top left drawer of her desk, not the recycling bin beneath it where paper without operational relevance went, and lifted the child. By 8:11, the truck was moving west toward Calder Ridge again. Junie woke halfway there and asked, "Are we doing the loud car?" "Yes, long time?" "Some." Junie considered the answer with the seriousness of 6 years old. "I brought Clover." "I see that." The paddock at night was another country from the one by daylight. Sodium lamps threw hard color onto wet patches of concrete. Generators hummed. Men who had looked certain at breakfast now moved with the clipped speed of people trying not to be seen hurrying. When Lena's truck pulled behind Bay 4 at 8:56, Mara was already outside waiting in a navy jacket with no headset and no visible impatience, as if she had been listening for the older engine note before it turned the corner. Junie climbed down, carrying Clover, and looking around with solemn interest at the midnight version of the world. Mara crouched to her level without rehearsing the gesture. "Hi, hi." Mara nodded toward the rabbit. "What's the rabbit's name?" "Clover." "That fits." Junie studied her face. "Are you scared?" Mara opened her mouth, then did something rarer than confidence. She answered the truth. "A little." Junie seemed satisfied by that and took Lena's hand. Inside, the bay had been stripped of ego as completely as the car had been stripped of bodywork. The number 28 sat on stands with the rear subframe exposed. Thermal blankets piled aside, day screens muted. tools laid out too neatly by people afraid to guess. Adrian stood near the far wall in a white shirt, with the sleeves finally rolled. Hunter was absent. Security had walked him to the parking lot after the owner read the email chain. For now, there was only the car, the clock, and the woman who crossed the threshold carrying a tool case older than the building's paint. Adrian stepped forward. "Miss Carter," Lena put the case down beside the gearbox stand. "I need the last 4 thermal images, the impact lap trace, and the original routing drawing printed full size." He stopped speaking, then he nodded once and turned to get them. No one announced her. No one apologized in a way that would ask her to do work on top of the work itself. She set Junie on the folding chair Mara had already placed in the corner with a clean team blanket and a cup of juice packed in ice. Junie tucked Clover under her arm and began lining 3 socket caps along the chair leg like patient silver animals. Lena washed her hands, dried them, put on nitrile gloves. Then she went to the car. The proof began quietly. She did not start with the data. She started with geometry. She sighted along the hot side branch from the firewall connector to the crank sensor run, measuring the loom's natural arc with her eyes before touching anything. She checked the floor repair patch, measured the stand height, asked for a straight edge, set it across the underbody repair, and used feeler gauges to show the pan had shifted 1 millimeters inward under the post-crash correction from the previous round. That small intrusion had pushed the loom branch closer to the bell housing than the drawing allowed. Not enough to fail cold, enough to fail hot. "Thermal growth?" Jules asked from half a step back. Lena nodded once. "And engine rock." She had the branch unwrapped in 3 minutes and 14 seconds, cutting tape only where she meant to, preserving every witness mark. Beneath the outer wrap, the braided shield looked intact until she bent it under, a penlight, and revealed a bright line, no thicker than hair, where the drain had begun to microfracture. She did not announce this like a victory. She simply held the light so Jules and Mara could see. Adrian watched from the edge of the bay. His hands were empty. Lena unclipped the connector body, depinned the drain, and put an ohmmeter across the shield, while Jules warmed the branch gently with a heat gun set at 117 degrees. Cold resistance looked acceptable. At temperature, flexed to the loaded radius, the reading jumped erratically enough to corrupt crank sync. There it was. A fault 3 senior engineers had missed because they had been testing what sat still, not what moved. "Print that," Mara said to no one and everyone. Lena was already beyond the discovery. She had no interest in being right once the car remained wrong. She asked for mil-spec 20-gauge shield drain, high-temp sleeve, adhesive-lined heat shrink, 2 rubber isolated standoffs, 1 longer titanium bracket bolt, and the original 17B routing plate if anyone had been intelligent enough not to throw it away. Jules ran. A senior mechanic named Wren, who had said almost nothing all day and had understood more than he could change, produced the routing plate from a drawer where he had quietly kept parts no one respected until midnight required them. The next 2 hours were method turned physical. Lena loosened the right side mount support just enough to induce the engine position it would reach, under loaded corner exit, then pinned it there with a measured spacer, so the loom could be built for worst case rather than shop comfort. She fabricated a new free radius path using the old plate, moved the first clamp point 12.6 millimeters outboard, sleeved the branch in ceramic braid, and rebuilt the shield drain with a service loop that allowed movement without strain. She changed the connector backshell and indexed each clamp for inspection. She adjusted the crank sensor gap by 0.14 millimeters after finding impact distortion on the bracket face. She had Jules pull the torque intervention tables and then altered 17 specific cells in the validation logic so the system would degrade to a managed derate rather than a full cut if signal quality dropped again under conditions short of catastrophic failure. Nobody in the bay mistook this for magic once they saw it closely. Magic is what incompetence calls knowledge at a distance. Up near the work, it was all sequence, angle, heat, and care. At 11:47 p.m., she asked for the starter only after the loom was secured, the thermal shields refitted, the bracket torqued, and the harness strain checked through full simulated engine rock. The first crank was aborted by Lena herself after half a second. "Stop!" She reached in, touched the branch, and looked at the left bank coil lead. "That clip's half-seated. Wren fixed it." Nobody pretended not to have missed it. The second crank lit on the second revolution. The idle settled at 184 revolution within 11 seconds. Oil pressure stable, sink clean. No torque intervention flags. Lena watched the trace without expression while the engine reached operating temperature. At 102 degrees, the line stayed clean. At 109, it stayed clean. At 114, joules was no longer blinking often enough. At 117, where the earlier readings had gone ragged, the trace remained smooth as cut wire. "Load it," Lena said. They ran the dyno simulation through rising rear load and controlled throttle stabs. The signal held. She was not finished. She had them cool it halfway, reheat it, repeat the corner exit torque demand, then kill one fan to alter underbody flow and create a more hostile temperature pattern, still clean. Sometime after midnight, Junie fell asleep in the folding chair with Clover under her chin and a socket cap closed in her fist like treasure. Mara draped another blanket over her without asking. When she straightened, her hand brushed Lena's sleeve because the space between the chair and the cart was narrow. Neither woman stepped back quickly enough to make the contact seem meaningless. Then the moment passed into work again. At 12:36 a.m., Adrian approached while Lena was logging the last validation note in block handwriting on the printed 17B sheet. "I should have listened this morning." Lena kept writing 1 second longer, finished the line, and capped the pen. "Yes," he stood there with the answer in his face. It was almost an apology. It stopped before becoming one. "I was operating on the information in front of me," he said. Lena looked at the car, not at him. "You had more available than you used." He accepted the sentence because it was true, and because truth delivered without heat is harder to resist than anger. After a moment, he said, "Why come back?" This time she looked at him. "Because if it cuts at 140 again, somebody else hits the wall." Nothing in her voice asked for his gratitude. Nothing offered him absolution. He nodded once. "What do you need?" "A quiet bay, written authority on the car until scrutiny, and no one touching that branch without me." "You have it." She turned back to the trace. The conversation ended there, unresolved and clean. The final test happened at 1:18 a.m. on the service loop under series supervision, because a repaired car was only theory until motion made it honest. Primary driver Raphael Sands slid into the seat with his injured teammates, replacement schedule already hanging over him. Lena leaned through the window net and tightened one shoulder strap 4 millimeters flatter across his clavicle, not because the crew could not do it, but because she had seen the right side sit high. "Any surprises?" he asked. "Not if they follow instructions." That was the longest reassurance he received. From the pit wall, Mara watched Lena stand with her hands behind her back, and her face turned toward the dark section after turn 9, where the earlier failure had sent Tomas into the barrier. Adrian stood 6 steps away. The car went out. 1 lap, 2, 3. The telemetry bars stayed green. On lap 4, the throttle application exiting turn 9 matched the earlier failure point within 1.8%. No cut. On lap 5, Raphael pushed harder through the same sector. No cut. When the car returned, the rear brakes ticked softly in the dark. Lena put her palm to the repaired branch housing and held it there long enough to feel the heat soak settle. Then she stepped back. "It will race," she said. No one cheered. Relief that deep rarely makes noise. The administrative resolution arrived at 1:52 a.m. In the corridor, between scrutiny and the bay, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look equally mortal. The owner had not yet reached the circuit, so the instruction came from the series technical delegate with Adrian present and Mara beside a stack of forms. "For this event," the delegate said, "all powertrain and harness decisions for the number 28 clear through Carter." There it was, not Lena, Carter. The restoration took the shape institutions understand best: paperwork, authority, signatures, access. It was enough. Hunter Voss's part in the matter resolved without theater. His credentials no longer opened doors by dawn. Adrian remained in place for the race weekend, but his geometry in the building had changed. He asked more questions and gave fewer answers. Reduction is sometimes only proportion restored. At 2:17 a.m., Mara found Lena at the wash sink, cleaning a cut across her knuckle she had earned on the backshell threads without noticing when it happened. Mara took the antiseptic from the tray, stepped closer, and caught Lena's hand lightly by the wrist before permission could become awkward. "This needs closing tape," she said. Lena let her hold the hand. "Probably." Mara dried the skin, laid the narrow strips across the split, and smoothed them down with the care of someone used to making things hold under motion. Their hands were close. The sink dripped once. Somewhere behind them, an air gun chirped and stopped. Junie appeared in the doorway, carrying Clover and looking half asleep. "Did the loud car get better?" "Yes," Mara said before Lena could. It was the first unguarded certainty in her voice all day. Junie considered that. Then she held up Clover's bent ear. "Can this too?" Mara took the rabbit, found a loose seam near the stitching, and laughed once under her breath. "I can manage that." She returned 3 minutes later with the ear sewn by black thread from the emergency kit, the repair neat and slightly visible, exactly the sort of fix that says someone believed the object would continue to matter. At 3:04 a.m., Adrian met Lena in the corridor outside the timekeeper's office with a printed temporary contract and a blank line at the bottom reserved for requests. "Ownership wants to formalize your authority through rescind," he said. "If you want terms, put them there." Lena read the page. She did not ask for back pay or Hunter's office. She took the pen and wrote 4 lines in square, controlled letters. No contractor removed from active diagnosis without written handover. Any anomaly affecting driveline, brake, fuel, or electrical safety requires cross-discipline review. Field fixes logged against original design drawings, not memory. Overnight event staff offered childcare reimbursement when schedule exceeds 10 hours. Adrian read the additions. He looked as though he had expected something else and had been made smaller by the fact that he was relieved. "Done," he said. She handed back the paper. The sky beyond the paddock edge had begun to pale by the time the bay finally exhaled. Breakfast carts rattled awake near the hospitality suites. Junie sat on an overturned tire and drank orange juice with ice from a clear plastic cup, while Clover rested in her lap with one newly sewn ear. The repaired rabbit looked slightly more itself than before. Lena crouched to zip Junie's jacket for the morning chill. Junie touched the tape on her mother's knuckle. "Did you win?" she asked. Lena glanced toward the car, toward the quiet cluster of mechanics around it, toward the printouts clipped neatly to the bayboard where anybody could now trace what had happened in honest sequence. "It starts," she said. Junie accepted that answer as sufficient. Children often do when adults are finally telling the truth. Mara came over with 2 paper cups of coffee, set one on the cart near Lena without comment, and looked with her at the number 28 as the first natural light touched its bare rear bodywork. "You're not staying in that motel again," she said. "We have an unused family suite above logistics." Lena looked at her once. "That practical?" "Yes." After a moment, Lena nodded. "All right." Nothing further was needed. The distance between their hands on the cart was less than an inch. When the first crew briefing began at 4:18 a.m., a mechanic at the board asked, "Who signs the final branch inspection?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Carter." Lena turned at that, not sharply, only enough for the room to catch the change. The corner of her mouth moved. It was small yet. On the passenger seat of the blue pickup, beside an empty orange juice cup beaded with melted ice, Clover's white ear leaned against the dawn-lit window.